Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The world of Harry Potter adaptations is, by nature, a compromise. Limited screen time, fast-paced storytelling, and the need not to overwhelm the audience all forced the screenwriters to sacrifice a vast amount of material. This became especially noticeable starting with The Prisoner of Azkaban and onward. Many chapters were cut entirely. And these weren't just minor details, they were full scenes that deepened the characters, added humor, or immersed us in the everyday magic of the wizarding world. Today, we'll revisit some of those moments. Enjoy the video. Number 1. The Lion and the Serpent. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 19. The Order of the Phoenix adaptation completely ignored Quidditch, yet in the book the field is where a true school drama unfolds. In the season's first match, Ron plays as Gryffindor's keeper for the first time. The pressure is intense, and the Slytherins chant a humiliating song about him. Harry catches the snitch, but Malfoy can't handle defeat and lashes out, publicly insulting Harry's mother and the Weasley parents. The response is immediate. Harry and George lunge at him. Umbridge retaliates by banning them from Quidditch for the rest of the year. This sequence never made it into the film, though it showcased rage, pride, and team spirit, all the things we love about Hogwarts. Number 2. Rita Skeeter's Scoop, Goblet of Fire, Chapter 24. Rita Skeeter is the embodiment of the tabloid press. When she publishes her piece about Hagrid's giant blood, the result is devastating. Poor Hagrid withdraws from teaching, locking himself in his hut, ashamed of who he is. At the Three Broomsticks, Harry and Hermione confront Rita publicly in a loud, very public showdown. Rita, of course, smirks without an ounce of remorse. The chapter ends with a touching return to Hagrid, who finds strength in the support of his students and Dumbledore. The film skipped this scene, yet it's precisely these moments that remind us how important it is to stand by a friend, not when they face enemies, but when they hide from shame. Number 3. Beetle at Bay, Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 25. Harry's date with Cho Chang remains one of the most awkward moments in the entire series. Instead of romance, misunderstanding, tension, and a fight, Harry proves himself clumsy in the role of a boyfriend. Cho is jealous, and the evening ends on a sad note. But then Harry heads to the Three Broomsticks, where he finds Hermione, Luna Lovegood, and, surprise, Rita Skeeter. Hermione has Rita under her control, forcing her to conduct an honest interview about Voldemort's return. The contrast between stern Hermione, irritable Rita, and dreamy Luna makes this chapter one of the most vivid and humorous in the book. And it's from this moment that the battle for truth begins. Number 4. Will and Won't, Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 3. The films leave out a lot, but few omissions sting like the absence of Dumbledore's visit to the Dursleys. That scene is a small triumph of justice. The Hogwarts headmaster politely but firmly reprimands Vernon and Petunia for how they've treated Harry. He never raises his voice, but his words carry immense power. Especially sharp is his rebuke of how they've raised Dudley with neither love nor responsibility. Harry also learns he's inherited Sirius's house and creature. At one point, the house elf even appears at number 4, Privet Drive, much to the Dursleys' horror. In the film, Dumbledore simply meets Harry at a train station. A chance for quiet moral satisfaction. Gone. Number 5. Christmas on the Closed Ward, Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 23. Order of the Phoenix is the longest book in the series, yet its film adaptation is the shortest. And this cost us the St. Mungo's hospital scene. After Arthur Weasley's attack, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny visit him. There, they run into Gilderoy Lockhart, still lost in amnesia. He continues to believe he's a genius and best-selling author. But the real heartbreak is the encounter with Neville's parents. They no longer recognize him. His mother hands him a candy wrapper as if it was something meaningful. That scene shatters your heart. It explains so much about who Neville is, His story is just as tragic as Harry's. Number 6. The Other Minister, Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 1. This chapter is one of the masterpieces of the series. It begins with the Muggle Prime Minister. He's in a state of panic. Bridges have collapsed, there are storms and mysterious disappearances. And then Cornelius Fudge shows up. The Minister for Magic calmly explains that all of this is Voldemort's doing. For the first time, magical and Muggle politics intersect at such a high level. We see how small and helpless the ordinary Prime Minister appears in the face of a magical crisis. By the end, Fudge introduces his successor, Rufus Scrimgeour. There's no action, no battle. But the scene creates a colossal sense of scale. It feels like clouds are gathering over the entire country, a cold, powerful prologue to the final stages of the Wizarding War. Number 7, the Dursleys departing. The hallway was quiet. Vernon Dursley stood stiffly, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He didn't want to leave Privet Drive. "This is our house," he barked. But there was fear in his voice, the kind that comes when a man realizes magic isn't going away. Harry tried to explain. The protective charm was about to break. The order was coming to move him. The Dursleys had to go. For once, Vernon didn't argue. He just didn't understand. There was something helpless in that, something human. But it was Dudley who broke the silence. Big, clumsy Dudley. He hesitated, then said, "I don't think you're a waste of space." Just that. No jokes, no fear, just a quiet thank you for saving his life, for growing up beside him, even if neither of them liked it much. Harry didn't know what to say. "Blimey, Dudders," was all he managed. In the book, that moment landed like a punch. After years of silence, Dudley gave him a gift, acknowledgement. The film skipped it, but in the book, that one line was enough to crack open everything Harry had ever felt about the people who locked him in a cupboard and called it love. Number 8. Nearly Headless Nick's Death Day Party. The dungeon was colder than usual that night. Harry, Ron and Hermione stepped into the ghostly glow of Nearly Headless Nick's 500th Death Day Party. Everything was wrong. The food was rotten. Maggoty haggis and mouldy cheese made for smell, not taste. The music moaned instead of played. The guests drifted through the air like grey mist, and Nick himself looked more mournful than ever. He had been rejected once again from the Headless Hunt. The celebration was his sad attempt at dignity. Moaning, Myrtle hovered near the bathroom door, offended no one had invited her properly. Her sulking turned into a revealing conversation later, giving Harry a clue that would lead to the Chamber of Secrets. The entire scene was odd, funny, and rich with atmosphere. The ghosts weren't just background figures. They had their own politics, sadness, and strange charm. The film skipped the party entirely. No grey feast, no sad host, no moment of magical weirdness that made Hogwarts feel truly alive, even in death. Number 9, the Battle of the Astronomy Tower. Chaos broke loose the moment Dumbledore fell. In the book, the Astronomy Tower becomes a war zone. The Death Eaters swarm through the corridors, spells fly, glass shatters. Fenrir Greyback sinks his teeth into Bill Weasley, leaving him disfigured and bleeding on the floor. Tonks fights beside McGonagall. Professor Flitwick is thrown aside, but not before blasting 2 masked attackers through a window. The castle, once a symbol of safety, turns hostile. There was a yell, a flash of green light, and the battle surges on. None of this made it to the film. There was no glimpse of Greyback's ferocity. No moment where Fleur Delacour proves her love for Bill despite his wounds. No desperate defense by the teachers. The scene was clipped down to a silent walk and a single tragic death, but the book gave readers a storm of fear, loyalty, and pain. It wasn't just the loss of Dumbledore, it was the first real battle inside Hogwarts. And it shook everything. Number 10, Snape's lesson. Professor Snape stood before the class with cold satisfaction. Lupin was absent, and Snape had seized the chance to teach defense against the dark arts, his long-coveted post. But instead of continuing the lessons Lupin had carefully built, Snape tossed them aside. "Turn to page 394, he ordered. The students obeyed, confused. The topic, werewolves. Not Grindylows, not hinky-punks, werewolves. Hermione raised her hand, questioning the change. Snape dismissed her sharply, his eyes fixed on Harry. The lesson felt more like a trap than education. Snape stalked the room, asking questions he knew the class couldn't answer. When Harry dared to challenge him, Snape's sarcasm turned sharp. "Possibly no one has told you Lupin has too much time for his students. Perhaps someone should." The classroom chilled. The word werewolf echoed in Harry's mind. It was the first time the idea took root, that Professor Lupin might be hiding something dangerous, and Snape had planted it. The film skipped this entire scene. It never showed the venom in Snape's teaching, the way he used the subject to attack Lupin's reputation. Without it, viewers lost the growing unease, the subtle build-up that made Lupin's eventual revelation hit so hard. The book let us feel it. Every sneer, every silence, every hint dropped like a breadcrumb. Snape wasn't just teaching, he was warning in his own bitter way. Number 11, The Tale of Winky. Winky sat alone in the Hogwarts kitchens, her tiny hands trembling as she clutched a butterbeer. She had once served the powerful Bartemius Crouch, a strict man who valued order above all, but after the chaos at the Quidditch World Cup, he had dismissed her in front of a crowd. "She is disgraced," Winky wailed, her big eyes filled with tears. "Winky has failed her master." To Hermione it was unthinkable. To Winky it was the worst shame imaginable. Hermione tried to reason with her. She had started SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, and believed that freedom was a gift. But Winky didn't see it that way. "Winky does not want freedom," she shouted. "Winky wants to serve." The conversation shook Hermione's worldview. It was the first time she realized that the elves' ideas of justice and dignity were not the same as hers. Even Dobby, the only elf who embraced freedom, was treated as an outsider by his own kind. More than just a moral debate, the scene hinted at something darker. Winky had been protecting a terrible secret. Her master's son, Barty Crouch Jr., was alive, beat and dangerous. Her breakdown and fragmented words gave the trio their first real clue. The film left it all behind. No Winky, no kitchen, no painful reflection on loyalty and servitude. But the book showed a world where kindness and control blurred, and even good intentions didn't always lead to the right kind of freedom. Number 12, The Midnight Duel. It was past midnight when Harry slipped through the corridors of Hogwarts, wand gripped tightly in hand. Malfoy had challenged him to a duel, but when Harry arrived, the Slytherin was nowhere to be seen. It had been a trap. Filch was coming. In the chaos, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and even Neville, who had tried to stop them, ended up running for their lives through the shadowy castle halls. They burst into a forbidden room on the 3rd floor, slammed the door shut, and froze. A massive creature stood before them, taller than Hagrid and 3 times as terrifying. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling, mad eyes, 3 noses twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes from yellowish fangs. That was Fluffy, Hagrid's 3-headed dog, and beneath Fluffy's enormous paws was a trapdoor, a secret entrance. Something was being guarded. This wasn't just a scary moment, it was a turning point. The students weren't supposed to be there, but this mistake, this moment of fear and curiosity, was the beginning of everything. It sparked questions. What was under the trapdoor? Why would Dumbledore allow such a beast in the school? And why was it so well hidden? The 4 of them, still breathing hard in the hallway afterward, had just stepped into a mystery that would define the rest of the year. The film skipped the entire chapter. No mention of the midnight trap. No secret duel. No first encounter with Fluffy happening by accident. Instead, the movie jumped ahead, trimming the sense of wonder and risk that made the early part of the book so magical. This scene wasn't essential to the plot, but it was essential to the spirit. It was the first adventure of 4 kids who would one day face death together, and it all started with a lie, a dare, and a locked door that wasn't quite locked enough. Number 13, The Last Will of Sirius Black. After Sirius Black's death, something unexpected happened. Harry became the owner not only of number 12, Grimmauld Place, but also of the foul-tempered house elf Kreacher. The magical laws of inheritance were clear. Everything Sirius owned now belonged to Harry. That included Kreacher, who had spent years loathing Harry and worshipping the Black family's pure blood ideals. When Hermione realized this, she warned him. If Kreacher refused to obey, he might default back to the next closest heir, the Malfoys. Harry didn't know what to expect. Kreacher had betrayed Sirius once already, leading to his death, and now this bitter little creature was his. In the drawing room of Grimmauld Place, Harry gave the house elf a direct command. "Kreacher, I want you to come here." Kreacher twitched, narrowed his eyes, and obeyed. Slowly, with a sneer, but he obeyed. Ron blinked. Hermione gasped. Harry, though surprised, said nothing. The room felt heavy, as if the weight of responsibility had landed all at once on his shoulders. This small moment spoke volumes. Harry had inherited more than just property. He had inherited Sirius's burdens, his past, and all the strange legacies tied to the Black name. Kreacher's reluctant obedience marked the beginning of a new dynamic, one Harry didn't know how to handle. "I didn't ask for him," he muttered later, more to himself than to Ron or Hermione. But it didn't matter, Kreacher was his now, and Grimmauld Place, whether Harry liked it or not, was now part of his war. None of this made it into the film. In the movie, Grimmauld Place simply becomes the Order's headquarters again, without explanation. Kreacher appears later, suddenly helpful, without the audience understanding why. But in the book, this chapter showed Harry learning to command, to take on the legacies of the dead, and to start dealing with things he didn't choose but couldn't avoid. That's where the story deepens. In the moments between the spells. Number 14, The Slug Club. The Slug Club shimmered with subtle power, veiled behind the clink of crystal glasses and the low hum of conversation. Horace Slughorn, the corpulent potions master with a penchant for famous names, created something that was far more than a social gathering. It was a calculated machine for social ascension. In Chapter 7 of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Rowling unveiled a layer of the magical world that the films would all but ignore. The Slug Club, with its velvet rope exclusivity and unspoken rules, offered a rare glimpse into the aristocracy of Wizarding Britain, where blood, talent, and potential were the currency of influence. The very first meeting Harry attends, a dinner compartment aboard the Hogwarts Express, sets the tone. Slughorn doesn't simply throw parties, he curates them. "I like to pick my favourites," he tells Harry, with a conspiratorial smile. There, gathered under flickering lanterns, sit characters who would never have voluntarily associated in a normal Hogwarts setting. Blaise Zabini, with his very beautiful mother who had been married 7 times, each husband dying mysteriously rich. Marcus Belby, son of a man Slughorn plainly didn't like, but nephew of the creator of the Wolfsbane potion, and of course, Harry himself, the boy who lived, the ultimate social trophy. What unfolds isn't just another scene of school politics, it is a mirror to the adult world. These are not random invitations. Slughorn sees potential, but more importantly, he sees opportunity. He is constructing a web, one connection at a time, ensuring that as these students rise, he remains relevant. It is not unlike a talent scout assembling a roster of rising stars, only the stakes here are ministry appointments, economic control, and magical innovation. "You are like the rest, just a bit more famous," Slughorn murmurs to Harry, revealing the chilling truth. Fame is the ticket, and he is the gatekeeper. What the films omit is how these gatherings function as microcosms of wizarding elitism. At the Christmas party in particular, we see the full manifestation of Slughorn's social strategies. The guests range from Gwenog Jones, the ferocious captain of the Holyhead Harpies, to Eldred Warple, the biographer of vampires. Rowling's prose captures the fine balance Slughorn maintains between charm and manipulation. He floats among his guests, pausing here to brag about having taught a minister of magic, there to nudge a student towards someone influential. "Harry, Harry, you must meet Gwenog. Gwenog, this is Harry Potter," he calls, treating Harry less like a student and more like an award he can parade. It's in these rooms, dripping with sugared pineapple and glazed hams, that the architecture of power in the magical world reveals itself. Hermione, despite her brilliance, is not a regular invitee. Bloodline and visibility matter more than intellect. Ron is an afterthought, even with his connection to the ministry through Arthur Weasley. Slughorn's bias is clear and cruel in its elegance. He selects with care, leaving others to question their worth. The club is a silent commentary on how the magical world maintains its hierarchies, not through open legislation but through handshakes and whispered recommendations. For Harry, this world is deeply uncomfortable. At first, he sees Slughorn's attention as a minor inconvenience, something to tolerate in exchange for better grades or leniency. But the discomfort grows. He realizes he's not a guest, he's the centerpiece. His fame is Slughorn's currency, and Harry feels the weight of being used. It was like being in a showcase, he thinks, watching the eyes of the other guests linger too long on him. The sense of being hunted, of being a trophy, is not romanticized. Rowling paints it with unease, making it clear that social capital can be just as imprisoning as it is empowering. Yet Dumbledore sees the club not as a threat, but as a tool. He understands Slughorn's psychology intimately. He knows that to reach the memory about Tom Riddle's Horcruxes, Slughorn must be manipulated through his own vanity and fear of shame. Dumbledore doesn't need to infiltrate the Slug Club himself. He sends Harry, who can do what no charm or spell can, earn trust through proximity. The very dynamic that makes Harry uncomfortable becomes the linchpin in the plan to defeat Voldemort. "You are the chosen one, Harry," Dumbledore says, not as prophecy, but as leverage. The club also brings forth the subtle tragedy of Slughorn himself. He is not evil, he is not even cruel, but he is weak, in a way that is often more dangerous than malevolence. He helps those he likes, he avoids discomfort. He cannot face the horror that he, perhaps unintentionally, encouraged Tom Riddle's dark ambitions. That's why he edits his memory. That's why he hides behind his club. The parties are his shield. If he surrounds himself with future success stories, he doesn't have to think about the one success that turned into a monster. This is perhaps most evident in the way he treats Harry's fame. He does not ask Harry how he feels about it. He does not express concern over the burden it places on a child. He only wants to benefit from the halo effect. "I was most upset to hear you were not joining my NUT class," he says, clutching his crystal glass, trying to coax the boy back into his circle. He does not see the contradiction in this behavior. In his world, association is everything, and Harry's presence lends legitimacy to his gatherings. Number 15, Room of Requirement, Training. Of all the hidden corners of Hogwarts, few spaces capture the heartbeat of rebellion and quiet resilience quite like the Room of Requirement. While the films gave us glimpses of this enchanted space, they glossed over the magic that pulsed through its ever-changing walls during the darkest days of Dolores Umbridge's reign. In Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 18, Dumbledore's Army, we witness more than just secret meetings. We witness the formation of a sanctuary, a forge where fear was melted into resolve, and students, once fragmented, became a collective. This chapter is not about action or danger, but about preparation, solidarity, and the silent birth of resistance. The room, which only reveals itself to those in great need, first appears to Harry in a moment of quiet hope. After the trio's decision to create a student-led Defense Against the Dark Arts group, the room materializes for them with an uncanny intuition. It provides cushions for dueling practice, shelves of magical reference books, and even a whistle for summoning attention, a sign of how the castle itself may have been rooting for its own defenders. It was a large, rectangular room with a high ceiling, lit with torches and hung with banners, Rowling writes, capturing a place that was more than a secret hideout. It was an answer to a prayer none of them dared to speak aloud. This was where Harry, no longer just the boy who lived, began to become something else entirely, a mentor, not polished or authoritative, but raw and vulnerable. There is a distinct tenderness to his teaching. He doesn't demand respect. He earns it through patience and honesty. "I'm not saying everything I did against Voldemort was good," he tells them, acknowledging his own fear. And it's in these confessions that his students lean in, trust him, and allow themselves to believe they, too, can be brave. This kind of emotional leadership was all but absent from the film adaptation, where Harry's role as a teacher feels more like a passing subplot than a defining arc. The room itself evolves alongside its occupants. As students improve their skills, it adapts, offering new tools and magical equipment. When they practice the Patronus charm, the room mirrors the icy feel of a Dementor's presence, enhancing the realism of the training. When Neville struggles, the room doesn't mock him. It cushions his fall, softens his landings, and gives him space to try again. The room seems to know that not all strength comes immediately, and that some must be nurtured gently. Neville's face was screwed up in concentration, Rowling writes. His wand trembled slightly, but no light emerged. Yet it is in that trembling that a different kind of courage is revealed. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't give up. Luna Lovegood, with her dreamy tone and unexpected insights, finds in this room something she's never had before: inclusion. She is not treated as an oddity here. Her ideas are not dismissed. When she defends the possibility of using non-traditional magical techniques, no one rolls their eyes. She practices side by side with others, her wand steady, her belief unwavering. Even characters like Zacharias Smith, ever skeptical and annoying, are allowed space in the room. It doesn't judge, it simply gives. The films portray Luna as quirky, but rarely show how vital she was to the spirit of the group, how she represented a different, unflinching form of belief. Ginny Weasley's transformation within these walls is particularly poignant. Initially seen as Ron's little sister or as a background character in the Room of Requirement, she begins to step forward as a formidable witch. She masters the Bat-Bogey hex so thoroughly that even the doubters fall silent. Her power is no longer anecdotal, it is proven. The text tells us, Ginny was doing the best of all of them. Here, she is not someone's sibling or love interest. She is herself, full and fierce. But perhaps the most transformative journey is that of Neville Longbottom. The room and Harry's reluctant but sincere mentorship pull something dormant from him. Each spell cast is an act of self-belief, and each mistake a chance to grow. Neville had improved beyond all recognition, the book later states. The films touch on Neville's courage at the Battle of Hogwarts, but they don't show the roots of it. How it was watered with hours of practice, falls, bruises, and small victories in the Room of Requirement. This is where he became more than a punchline. This is where he learned to fight. The group calls itself Dumbledore's Army, not just as a mockery of Umbridge's paranoia, but as a declaration. They are soldiers, even if they don't yet know the battlefield. The room becomes a bunker of spirit, preparing them not only to face external threats, but to reclaim their agency from a system that sought to silence them. When they gather there, they are no longer isolated students. They are a united force. The walls seem to pulse with that defiance. The film gives us flashes of this. We see students training, Harry encouraging, spells flying. But what is missing is the intimacy, the slow-burning trust, and the weight of what they're truly building. In the book, when they gather in a circle and chant the name of their group as Hermione writes it on a piece of parchment, it feels sacred. They're not just practicing magic, they're choosing loyalty, courage, and belief. They're saying, "We are not alone." And Harry, for the first time, sees the possibility that he can be more than a survivor. The students look at him not with pity, but with admiration and hope. He begins to realize that his experiences, his traumas, his battles, have given him knowledge that can be used for good. When he demonstrates the disarming charm or shows them the correct way to cast a shield charm, he does so with the tenderness of someone who knows what it's like to need protection. The chapter also shows the stark contrast between imposed control and earned leadership. Umbridge tries to dominate through surveillance and punishment. Harry leads through empathy and example. This is a fundamental message of the book that the film almost completely ignores. The difference between power and influence, between fear and respect, is carved clearly in the fabric of that room. Number 16, Aragog's Funeral. The chapter titled After the Burial in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince holds a singular place in the series, an odd blend of sorrow and absurdity, a moment at once heavy and light, sorrowful and somehow, unmistakably, magical. It was an evening woven from threads of grief, intoxication, and cunning, a tapestry the film adaptation never attempted to recreate. The death of Aragog, Hagrid's beloved giant spider, might seem like an incidental subplot, yet its emotional and narrative resonance is far deeper than it first appears. Its omission in the movie created a hollow space where once lay a profound turning point in Harry's quest against Voldemort. Aragog had always been a symbol of the bizarre loyalty Hagrid offered to misunderstood creatures. From the moment he introduced the acromantula in Chamber of Secrets, Hagrid's affection was unwavering. Even though Aragog had nearly devoured Harry and Ron years earlier, Hagrid mourned him as a dear friend. Aragog's death gave us another glimpse into Hagrid's soul, the tender heart beneath the towering figure, the man who cried over creatures others saw as nightmares. Rowling writes, "He's dead. I had to bury him, in the dark. I had to do it alone." Those words, murmured with trembling grief, revealed that even the terrifying has its place in the world of love. This funeral was not simply about Aragog. It became the unlikely theatre for a pivotal moment in Harry's mission to defeat Voldemort. Slughorn, the evasive potions master with a memory Harry desperately needed, had rebuffed all attempts to surrender the truth about Horcruxes. Felix Felicis, the liquid luck potion, gave Harry the nudge to act on a hunch, to visit Hagrid that very evening. What followed was a sequence that could only unfold in Rowling's peculiar world, a grave for a monstrous spider, a drunken academic, and a boy wielding subtlety instead of spells. Slughorn, terrified of the Forbidden Forest, required much coaxing to even consider the trip. But Harry, under the influence of Felix Felicis, exuded an unshakable calm and uncanny intuition. He invited the professor to join him in paying respects to a fallen creature, knowing somehow it would work. Slughorn arrived reluctant and grumbling, and Rowling paints the scene vividly. His gaze lingered uncomfortably on the enormous hairy body of the dead acromantula. This detail, the revulsion masked by civility, underscored the absurdity of the event and the way it peeled back Slughorn's polished veneer. As Hagrid wept and drank, and Slughorn gradually followed suit, something extraordinary happened. The sombre mood of the funeral mingled with the surreal image of two men, one distraught, the other increasingly tipsy, mourning a giant spider. Rowling's strength has always been in this balance, and she showed it here with perfect control. It wasn't slapstick, and it wasn't melodrama. It was bizarrely human. What makes the moment unforgettable is the slow erosion of Slughorn's caution. Under the influence of wine and emotion, he found himself comforted by the warmth of Hagrid's fire and the strange sincerity of Harry's presence. The lines blur between predator and prey, between manipulation and companionship. Harry wasn't deceiving Slughorn with lies, but with timing. He knew, because the potion told him, that this was the moment the professor would yield. And yield he did. Slughorn's speech, slurred and nostalgic, meandered through tales of Lily Evans, the girl he had so admired. Her brightness, her talent, her laugh, it all came flooding back. "She was one of my absolute favourites," he said, and that line, so tender in its delivery, pierced through years of evasion. The walls came down, the memory came out. This memory, the true account of a conversation between Slughorn and the young Tom Riddle, was perhaps the single most important clue Dumbledore needed to understand Voldemort's immortality. It was the missing piece. Without it, Harry would not know the number of Horcruxes. Without it, Dumbledore would never have set out to find the ring. Without it, the locket might never have been sought. And all of that hinged on a funeral for a spider. The cinematic version of Half-Blood Prince opted to skip this chapter entirely. The memory is extracted in a completely different way, stripped of its strange warmth and humour, and turned into a darker, more aggressive scene between Harry and Slughorn in the greenhouse. The entire backdrop of Aragog's funeral is gone, along with the emotional layering it offered. The film lost the gentle irony of the moment, that in the middle of grief, beneath a canopy of acromantula webs and forest gloom, the war against Voldemort took a small but crucial step forward. What was lost was not merely a setting, but the spirit of Rowling's storytelling. The film chose a conventional method of confrontation. The book offered complexity. Felix Felicis didn't force anyone to act. It allowed events to unfold with natural ease. The funeral wasn't part of a plan. It was the product of intuition, emotion, and trust in the unpredictable. Harry didn't coerce Slughorn. He shared grief. He listened. He waited. And that waiting, that softness, became a weapon sharper than any wand. Hagrid's role in this scene was not incidental either. His grief anchored the evening. It was sincere, overwhelming, and unfiltered. His lament for Aragog was a mirror to the way he mourned all lost things, his expelled childhood, his broken wand, even Buckbeak's near execution. "Poor old Aragog," he kept saying, and with every repetition it became harder to dismiss the moment as comedic. Grief humanizes, and in Hagrid's grief everyone else had permission to drop their masks. Slughorn in particular needed that. He was a man of appearances, obsessed with reputation and influence. But sitting beside a sobbing half-giant, clutching a wine bottle in the flickering firelight, he couldn't hide any more. He had loved Lily Evans, he had given Tom Riddle something unspeakable. And now, for the first time, he was ready to admit the weight of that mistake. Rowling gives us this moment not just for plot, but for character. Slughorn's confession is not a triumph of logic or strength. It is a triumph of empathy. The emotional intelligence Harry showed here, facilitated by the potion, yes, but still deeply his, foreshadows the man he would become. The boy who once demanded answers now listens for them. The weapon Dumbledore taught him to wield, love, proves itself. Again, number 17, Xenophilius Lovegood's betrayal. The frost had barely melted from the trees when Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood outside the crooked house of Xenophilius Lovegood. The journey through the frozen countryside had left their faces wind-burned and their hearts thudding with uncertainty. Luna's father was their last fragile hope in a world that was cracking apart under Voldemort's shadow. They expected eccentricity, certainly, but not fear. And yet fear was the first thing that greeted them at the threshold. The house rose like a riddle against the wintry sky. It was an odd, lopsided tower, its chimney leaning dangerously, as if whispering secrets to the snow clouds. The inside of the house matched its outward chaos, strange, whimsical, and utterly disordered. Brightly coloured carpets clashed with tapestries embroidered with cryptic runes. A constellation of dirigible plum decorations floated aimlessly near the ceiling. An ornate chandelier shaped like an orrery hovered, ticking softly with the movement of stars that weren't real. But the strangeness of the home paled next to the transformation of its owner. Xenophilius Lovegood, editor of The Quibbler, was a ghost of the man Harry remembered. The sparkle of mischief in his pale eyes had vanished, replaced by an agitated flicker, as if he were being haunted. His robes, once festive, hung off his frame like mourning garb. He didn't offer them tea or a smile, only silence, then stammering hospitality tinged with panic. It was in this space, this decaying wonderland, that Harry first saw the symbol. It adorned the pages of an old book left on a table, the triangle, the circle, the vertical line, the deathly hallows. It burned itself into Harry's mind with quiet violence. "That," Xenophilius muttered, eyes flickering, "is the mark of the hallows." In this chapter, the tale of the three brothers was still pages away. Here, the symbol was myth veiled in paranoia. Xenophilius, despite his terror, explained the mark: the vertical line, the elder wand; the circle, the resurrection stone; the triangle, the cloak of invisibility. "Together," he said, with a voice that trembled on every syllable, "they make one master of death." And with that the hook was set in Harry's heart. This wasn't just folklore. This wasn't Dumbledore's nonsense or bedtime stories. This was a map to something more powerful than Horcruxes, something older. The air in the room became dense. Ron shifted uncomfortably, and Hermione, ever the skeptic, questioned every word. But Harry stared at the symbol as though it had unlocked something primal. The conversation meandered, then lurched toward confusion. Why had Dumbledore left this symbol in his will? Why had he marked it in the tales of Beetle the Bard? Why had he worn it around his neck? The house creaked under the weight of its owner's deception. With every passing minute, Xenophilius grew more erratic. His hand shook as he fetched parchment. His eyes darted to the window, then to the staircase, then back to his guests. Something was wrong. And then, suddenly, the betrayal slipped through the cracks like poison gas. He was stalling. He was desperate. He was sending an owl to the Death Eaters. It wasn't because he hated them. It wasn't because he no longer believed in them. It was because Luna had been taken. "She's in Azkaban," he finally admitted, voice cracking like dry wood. The Ministry had her. His home was under watch. And now he had something to trade. Harry Potter, the chosen one, a boy's life for his daughters. The moment wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, tragic, ugly. There was no musical swell, no triumphant escape scene, just the devastating realization that love could twist into betrayal under enough pressure. Xenophilius was not evil. He was not a Death Eater. He was a father who had been pushed past the brink by grief. What the film adaptation failed to show was how deeply this betrayal cut, not just for Harry, but for the tone of the entire war. This was not a war of simple allegiances. This was not good versus evil in black and white. It was parents selling out heroes in desperation. It was madness infecting even the most idealistic. It was the crumbling of dreams under the weight of survival. The house betrayed them too. As the Death Eaters approached, the tower seemed to lurch into chaos. Spells flew, walls buckled. A printing press exploded in the corner, scattering articles on Nargles and crumple-horned Snorkax like shrapnel. The staircase tried to collapse on them. The chandelier swung like a guillotine. Xenophilius tried to stop them, tears in his eyes, his wand shaking, but they escaped, barely. It is in this escape that the reader sees the growing cost of war. Harry didn't just leave behind another safe house. He left behind a man broken by the same forces he was fighting against, a man who had once believed in truth and madness equally, and now neither had saved his daughter. This moment, subtly tucked into Chapter 15, altered Harry. The idea of mastering death became more than an abstract riddle. He wants it, the wand, the stone, the cloak, Hermione would later whisper, fearful. But here, in the strange home of Luna's father, the seed had been planted. The Hallows offered something Voldemort's Horcruxes didn't: hope without corruption, power without soul-splitting, an answer to death that didn't require murder. The movie showed the spinning symbol, the tale of the three brothers, and even the escape. But it never showed Xenophilius shaking as he wrote a letter to his daughter that would never arrive. It never showed the room where Luna's belongings were untouched, preserved like a shrine. It never showed Hermione, face pale, realizing that not even the Lovegoods were safe. It never showed the cost of obsession. It is through this chapter that Rowling introduced one of her most powerful metaphors, that symbols, no matter how ancient, mean nothing unless someone believes in them. Xenophilius believed in the Hallows, Dumbledore believed in them, Harry would believe. And yet belief, when consumed by desperation, could unravel even the sanest mind. "I must save Luna," he said, "not with magic, not with courage, but with betrayal." Harry saw in Xenophilius the mirror of what he could become, a young man chasing symbols, chasing myths, convinced that death could be conquered by knowledge alone. But the love that burned in Xenophilius had led him not to heroism, but to collapse. And Harry would carry that image with him to the very end. The chapter, in the novel, is a masterclass in psychological tension. Every object in the Lovegood home is a character. The printing press breathes like a monster, the chandeliers mutter secrets, the staircase groans in protest. Even the wind outside hisses with foreboding. The house is not just eccentric, it is sentient with sorrow. It was here, too, that Harry realized the weight of fame. Xenophilius, for all his madness, saw Harry not as a boy, but as a bargaining chip. "They'll come for you," he said. And he was right. Fame was no longer a shield, it was a target. And Harry understood, with bone-deep clarity, that he could never again ask for help without endangering the helpers. Even Ron, often the comic relief, felt the darkness of this chapter. He didn't joke, he didn't argue. He watched. And in that watching, we saw the trio shift from fugitives to warriors. They were no longer children on a quest, they were soldiers in a war where innocence was the first casualty. And Hermione, always practical, always skeptical, was shaken most of all. Her belief in books, in logic, in reason was useless here. The Hallows, like magic itself, defied reason. They were a storybook folded into prophecy. She couldn't prove or disprove them, and that uncertainty unnerved her. When they disapparated from the ruins of the house, the snow fell silently on a battlefield that had no name. No one had died that night. No blood had been spilled. But something had been lost nonetheless. Trust. Innocence. The illusion that eccentricity was safe. What the film failed to convey was this slow, quiet descent, this moral erosion, this emotional greyness. In ignoring the full scope of Xenophilius's desperation, it robbed the audience of a deeper truth, that good men can make terrible choices when grief takes the wheel. In the end, the chapter wasn't about the Hallows, it was about what people are willing to sacrifice for love, and what remains of them after. Number 18, the House of Gaunt. It begins not in the shadowed halls of Hogwarts, but in a filthy, crumbling shack hidden deep within the thickets outside the village of Little Hangleton. The scene Harry witnesses through the pensive in Chapter 10 of Half-Blood Prince is more terrifying than any ghost or dark creature. There is no eerie music or camera cutaways, just the raw, unsettling horror of a real wizarding family, descended from Salazar Slytherin himself, twisted by bloodline obsession, madness, and decay. Marvolo Gaunt's hut is where the legacy of Lord Voldemort was truly born, and yet the film chose to turn away from this moment, leaving behind one of the most haunting and revelatory chapters in the entire series. The memory belonged to Bob Ogden, a Ministry of Magic official who arrived at the Gaunt shack one morning wearing a moleskin overcoat, only to be met with a torrent of abuse, both verbal and magical. The Gaunts, Marvolo, Morphin, and Merope embodied every dark stereotype associated with pure blood supremacy. Marvolo, the patriarch, was loud, cruel, and proudly ignorant. He wielded his lineage like a weapon, snarling at Ogden, "I am a Parselmouth, you filthy little mudblood, and my son is a Parselmouth too." There was no attempt at civility, only a rotting pride in a name that had long ceased to command respect. Morphin Gaunt was worse. With a wild look in his eye, he brandished a knife as he sat outside the hovel, hissing to himself in Parseltongue and tormenting muggles for sport. His idea of amusement was cursing Tom Riddle Sr. simply for walking by their home. When Ogden demanded answers, Morphin merely grinned and said he was asking for it. The film reduces Voldemort's origins to a few lines and a fleeting glance at the past. But the book lays bare the rot, a house where hatred was inherited like heirlooms and cruelty was spoken like a native tongue. And then there was Merope, the daughter, silent and shrinking in the corner, visibly trembling under her father's hand. Marvolo treated her with disdain and open contempt. He called her a filthy squib and lashed out when she dropped a pot. Her presence was ghost-like, and yet in this silent figure lay the tragic seed of Voldemort's story. Merope Gaunt, the mother of Tom Marvolo Riddle, was a broken woman long before she ever brewed a love potion. She lived her life being told she was worthless. She had no wand when Ogden first saw her, only bruises and shame. The films robbed the audience of the realization that Voldemort, the most feared dark wizard of all time, did not arise from some majestic tragedy or grand betrayal. He was born of neglect, delusion, and control. J.K. Rowling painted his lineage in shadows, and this chapter is her brushstroke of horror. Marvolo's madness, Morphin's violence, and Merope's despair, the unholy trinity of his bloodline. The shack, with its broken walls and crawling vines, felt more like a cursed reliquary than a home. It is significant that Merope was not a squib at all. After the Ministry arrested Marvolo and Morphin for attacking Ogden and using magic on a muggle, she was left alone for the first time, alone and suddenly capable of magic. Her wand lit up the air and she became something her father never allowed, a witch in her own right. It was then that she made her move. She enchanted Tom Riddle Sr., the handsome muggle who passed by their home on horseback, the man Morphin hated for his looks, his wealth, and his non-magical blood. The book hints at the use of a love potion, though never confirms it outright. Dumbledore speculates, "I think it more likely that she used a love potion." This uncertain phrasing only adds to the horror. Was it a potion, a compulsion spell, or simply an act of desperation from a girl who had never known love and mistook control for affection? Whatever it was, it worked. Tom Riddle Sr. vanished from the village and eloped with Merope Gaunt. For a brief moment, the broken girl believed she had escaped the curse of her family. But the story does not turn romantic. Merope became pregnant. She stopped giving him the potion, if indeed she had ever used one, and he abandoned her. Left alone and destitute, she gave birth at an orphanage on New Year's Eve. She named the boy Tom for his father and Marvolo for her own. And then she died, alone, forgotten, unloved. The woman who had tried to defy her heritage ended up fulfilling its most sinister prophecy. She birthed a child incapable of love. This haunting backstory explains more than any battle or duel could. Voldemort's cruelty is not just learned, it is inherited. He came from a house where love was weakness, power was pride, and humanity was irrelevant. As Dumbledore later explains, you place too much importance, and you always have done, on the so-called purity of blood You fail to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be. That line, though spoken to a different audience, echoes most loudly in this memory. The ring Marvolo wore on his finger, which he flashed at Ogden with manic pride, was the same one Voldemort would later turn into a Horcrux. It bore the Peverell coat of arms and was passed down through the Gaunt family for centuries. Voldemort, in claiming it for himself, did not just inherit a cursed object, he claimed the entire legacy of death and decay that it symbolized. That ring, once worn by a madman, became part of a larger puzzle that would define the hunt for Horcruxes. In the film, we see none of this. No Hovel, no Ogden, no Merope. The entire Gaunt chapter is swept aside in favor of streamlined storytelling. But that choice cost the audience something precious, an understanding of how evil takes root not in great battles, but in households where cruelty is routine. Rowling's message is clear. Monsters are not born in dungeons, but in kitchens in silence, in the places where children grow up without kindness. Morfin Gaunt, later imprisoned for attacking Tom Riddle Sr. with a curse, never even knew he had a nephew. When Voldemort came to visit him years later, he did not come for reconciliation, he came for information. Voldemort learned his father's name, then promptly murdered him, along with his grandparents. He framed Morfin for the crime, modified his memory, and left. For Voldemort it was not a family reunion, it was a cleansing of weakness. He erased every trace of his Muggle ancestry. In doing so, he proved himself a true Gaunt. The line of Slytherin had always been obsessed with purity, with legacy, and with power. Voldemort was merely the final fruit of that poisoned tree. Merope died trying to escape it. Her son embraced it. That contrast between a mother who wanted love and a son who rejected it forms the tragic spine of the chapter. It is the heartbeat of Voldemort's past, and the reason he became a creature of such staggering cruelty. What makes the chapter even more unsettling is its realism. The Gaunts are not Death Eaters or political ideologues. They are a broken family, poor and violent, proud and isolated. Their madness is generational. Marvolo's insistence on purity is not ideological, it is personal. He has nothing else left to claim. "I'm a Gaunt, a descendant of Slytherin," he spits. It's the kind of mantra repeated by men with nothing left but their names. Even the small details in the book paint a grim picture. The snake nailed to the door, the smell of decay, the heap of rotten food in the corner, the fact that Merope flinches at every raised voice. Rowling crafts a scene where magic feels monstrous, not marvelous. There is no whimsy, no Hogwarts charm, only the truth that some magic users are more terrifying than any beast. And worse, they can create other beings just like them. This is what the film missed. By skipping the Gaunt chapter, it skipped the soul of Voldemort's creation. It gave us the result, Voldemort the villain, but not the process. The book tells us how hatred can be taught, how love can be denied, and how power can grow in the soil of pain. It shows us the wreckage of a house where evil was not a choice, but a legacy. Voldemort's greatest crime was not simply becoming dark, it was refusing every opportunity to be anything else. And so the memory of Bob Ogden remains one of the most powerful revelations in the series. It does not show war or wands clashing. It shows a house that should have been a refuge turned into a forge for cruelty. The Gaunts did not raise Voldemort, but they made him possible. They planted the seed. They gave him a name and a birthright that would fester into horror. In a way, Chapter 10 of Half-Blood Prince is a ghost story. Not of spectres or ghouls, but of what happens when the past refuses to die. Marvolo's bloodline, Morfin's rage, and Merope's heartbreak echo in Voldemort's every act. The films offered us the monster, the book showed us the child of a broken woman, the grandson of a madman, and the legacy of a house that poisoned itself from within. Rowling's genius is in showing that evil doesn't need a wand to be born. Sometimes all it takes is a father's hatred, a brother's violence, and a world that refuses to rescue the girl in the corner. That is the story of the Gaunts. That is the chapter the films ignored, but it is the chapter that explains everything. Number 19, Petunia's Almost Apology. In the final book of the Harry Potter series, The Deathly Hallows, readers are given a fleeting chance to glimpse the Dursleys one last time before they vanish from Harry's life forever. It is a scene of departure, terse and cold, filled with unfinished emotions and unspoken words. The moment passes quickly with Vernon growling, Dudley fumbling through a clumsy goodbye, and Petunia walking away in silence, however behind. That silence, J.K. Rowling had once imagined a different scene, one that never made it to the page, let alone the screen. A scene where Petunia Dursley, Harry's bitter and scornful aunt, attempts to express something real, raw, and painfully human: regret. Rowling, in interviews, spoke of an early draft in which Petunia would pause at the door, glance back at her nephew, and whisper, "You didn't just lose a mother, you know. I lost a sister." These words, as simple as they are, carry the weight of decades of jealousy, resentment, fear, and grief. They would have peeled back the surface of a woman portrayed for years as cruel and petty, revealing not kindness, perhaps, but a submerged sorrow that shaped every dismissive word and every cold glance. Petunia Evans had once been a girl who knew magic existed. Not the fantastical kind that lived in fairy tales, but the real kind, alive and breathing in her sister, Lily. She watched Lily learn spells, receive a letter from a magical school, and vanish into a world she could never enter. Petunia's own letter never came. Her own place at that table of wonders was denied. The rejection was not spoken aloud, but it was felt with every owl that didn't arrive, with every tale Lily told of a place called Hogwarts. And so a seed of bitterness was planted in a young girl's heart, a seed that would grow into contempt. Yet contempt is often a mask for longing. Petunia wrote to Dumbledore once, pleading to be allowed into Hogwarts. It was an act of desperation, and it was denied. The rejection stung deeper than any insult could, for it confirmed what she feared most, that she was ordinary, mundane, unwanted. And when Lily chose to embrace the magical world fully, choosing James Potter, a wizard, as her husband, and immersing herself in the Order of the Phoenix, Petunia felt abandoned. Her sister had flown away, leaving Petunia behind with her envy, her rage, and her loneliness. By the time Harry arrives on her doorstep, an orphaned infant with eyes so painfully identical to Lily's, Petunia is a fortress of suppressed memory. She does not scream because she is angry, she screams because she is drowning. Every diaper she changes, every meal she prepares, every school form she signs for the boy under her roof is a reminder that her sister is gone, and that the magic Petunia once envied now lives inside her nephew. To love Harry would mean acknowledging Lily. To be kind to him would be to admit that she still grieved. And so instead she built a wall of cruelty and silence. This is why the deleted scene, the line, never spoken, would have changed everything. Imagine, in that moment at the threshold, with her bags packed and Vernon grumbling in the background, Petunia hesitates. She sees Harry, taller now, no longer the wide-eyed child she once loathed, but the living shadow of her sister. Her lips part, and for a brief second her voice almost trembles, but the words die in her throat. She turns and walks away, the silence louder than any apology. Rowling says that Petunia could not bring herself to say the words, and that is tragedy. Tragedy in its purest form. Petunia Dursley was never a witch, but she carried her own kind of magic, the painful magic of memory. She remembered the flower Lily once made bloom in her hand, the laughter they once shared under the summer sun, and the pain of knowing she would never be chosen. That memory didn't die when Lily did. It festered. And when Harry entered her home, her childhood grief returned, in the form of this small, green-eyed boy asking for love she no longer knew how to give. There is a brief, overlooked moment in The Philosopher's Stone that hints at this. When Hagrid bursts through the door of the hut on the rock and reveals Harry's heritage, Petunia explodes, not just with anger, but with venom. My dratted sister being what she was, a freak, she screams, but her words are a mask. My dratted sister is really my beloved sister, twisted by years of denial. Her tirade is too passionate to be mere hate. It's the outcry of someone who once dared to dream of being special and whose dreams were crushed. The films never gave Petunia this nuance. Fiona Shaw, the actress who portrayed her, has spoken in interviews of the depth she imagined in Petunia's character. In one deleted scene that was filmed but cut, she looks at Harry and says nothing, her expression taut with meaning. It is not enough. A look cannot substitute for a lifetime of silence breaking. And the line that Rowling imagined, "You didn't just lose a mother, I lost a sister," could have rewritten how we saw Petunia forever. When Dudley, of all people, walks up to Harry in the Deathly Hallows and awkwardly thanks him for saving his life, it is a moment of redemption. But it is also the moment where Petunia should have spoken. Rowling envisioned her trying to say something honest. It would not have erased her cruelty, but it would have explained it. We would have understood that her hatred was never born in darkness, it was born in heartbreak. Petunia's life was not easy. She married Vernon, a man as dismissive of magic as she had forced herself to be. Their home on Privet Drive was meticulously ordinary, painfully so. The clean hedges, the beige curtains, the neat lawn, these were not signs of pride, but armour. Every bit of normalcy was a shield against the abnormal world that had stolen her sister. In clinging to Vernon and his world, Petunia tried to scrub the magic from her life. But magic, as we know, does not yield easily. It is poetic, then, that Petunia's son Dudley begins to break free from that mould. His recognition of Harry as a human being, perhaps even as family, is a crack in the wall Petunia built. One imagines that she saw it, that it scared her, and that it also gave her hope. Her silence as she stood at the doorway was not indifference. It was paralysis. To speak would be to admit everything, and perhaps she feared that Harry would not forgive her. The books are filled with forgiveness. Sirius forgives Dumbledore, Harry forgives Snape, Ron forgives Hermione, but Petunia is denied that moment, or perhaps she denies it to herself. That is the sadness of her story. Her chance at healing came and went like the whisper of a forgotten spell. Rowling has said that she wanted Petunia to have that line, but in the end it was more in character for her not to say it. And perhaps she is right. Perhaps the truest expression of Petunia's grief was her inability to express it at all. The very fact that she wanted to say it and couldn't is a window into her soul. And so we are left with the unsaid, with the moment that could have been, with a woman who lost her sister to a world she couldn't enter, and who spent her life trying to erase the pain by erasing the boy who reminded her of it. And yet, in the final hour, the words came to her lips. Petunia's tragedy is not that she hated Harry, it is that she couldn't love him, not because she was incapable, but because she was wounded. Her story is one of small wounds that never healed, of grief that curdled into spite, of love buried beneath years of ash. She is not a villain in the traditional sense. She is a casualty of the divide between magic and muggle, between Lily and the world Petunia was never allowed to enter. And though the films chose not to give her that moment, and though the book did not include the line, it lives on in Rowling's notes and in the minds of readers who understand that silence can be more revealing than speech, that sometimes the words we do not say matter more than the ones we do, and that even in a world of wands and dragons, the quiet grief of a jealous sister can be the most human magic of all. Number 20, I saw myself. Of all the chapters that Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban gifted to readers, Chapter 21, Hermione's Secret, remains one of the most profound, magical, and emotionally resonant. Yet in the cinematic adaptation, this chapter was whittled down to a skeletal echo of its literary origin. The film captured the broad strokes of the time travel rescue, but it stripped away the essence, the quiet terror, the psychological tension, the self-realization, and left behind a rushed sequence devoid of the transformative weight it held in the book. What was lost was not merely screen time, but a turning point in Harry's inner evolution, especially as he faced the lake and saw what he thought was his father. In the book, the sequence unfolds with tension and intricacy. When Dumbledore subtly advises Hermione to use the time turner, a hush falls over the narrative. It's not action that drives the scene, but the thick pulse of anticipation. Hermione is frightened. She's done this before, going back hours to take extra classes. But this journey is different. The risks are colossal. Awful things happen to wizards who meddle with time, she murmurs. The gravity of her words lingers like fog. They're not simply breaking rules, they're tampering with the architecture of fate. The book does not rush this fear. It lets Hermione's anxiety breathe, and in doing so it reminds readers that magic, while wondrous, carries sharp edges. As they retrace their path through the grounds, the narrative takes on a ghostly quality. Everything is familiar, yet it feels wrong, like walking through a dream of the past. They watch themselves cross the lawn, ducking behind hedges to avoid being seen. The world is the same, yet it pulses with danger. The danger isn't external, it's the looming paradox, or at least the threat of being seen by themselves, of disrupting the timeline. The film touches on this only briefly, but in the book, the peril is intimate and psychological. Hermione clutches at Harry's sleeve every time they skirt too close to their past selves, and her mind reels with worst-case scenarios. She's always been the cautious one. Here, her caution keeps them alive. And then there's the scene by Hagrid's hut. In the film, Buckbeak is freed quickly, a few rocks tossed, a cut to the rope, and the creature disappears into the trees. But in the book, the rescue is slow, deliberate, and full of trembling suspense. They wait, hidden in the forest, watching their earlier selves and Hagrid through the window. Fudge arrives, Dumbledore stalls. The executioner swings his axe, not at Buckbeak, but at a fence post in frustrated pretense. The sound makes Hermione gasp. The film reduced it to a brief tensionless moment, but Rowling's prose gives it the weight of a gunshot. They don't just save a hippogriff, they outwit the Ministry, cheat death, and preserve innocence. Still, the real emotional core lies not in Buckbeak's flight, but in what happens beside the lake. In the movie, this scene feels almost like a footnote. But in the book, it is a full crescendo, a pivotal metamorphosis for Harry Potter. As they watch the events unfold from across the water, Harry is convinced, utterly, unwaveringly, that his father will appear. He waits, trembling. The Dementors close in on his past self and Sirius, and still he waits. And when no one comes, when the shadow across the water does not reveal James Potter, something fractures. Harry realizes that he had seen a figure conjuring the Patronus, not his father, but himself. I knew I could do it this time, he thinks, because I'd already done it. It's not just a twist in the plot, it is a revelation. It is the moment Harry becomes his own protector. He steps forward, lifts his wand, and produces a Patronus so powerful it scatters over 100 Dementors. "Expecto Patronum," he cries, and from the end of his wand bursts a stag, not a faint shimmer, but a creature of light and memory, full-bodied, graceful, defiant. It is his father's animagus form, but it is not James who saved him. It is Harry. The boy who always longed for his parents, always sought protection, has now become the one who protects. The psychological depth here is immense. Harry's understanding of time doesn't just allow him to act, it gives him courage. The paradox is not a puzzle, but a promise. The boy who always needed help discovers that he was, unknowingly, his own salvation. I saw myself conjuring the Patronus before. I knew I could do it this time because I'd already done it. The circular logic is not confusing. It is empowering. It is the narrative embodiment of self-fulfilling belief. Rowling transforms time travel into a metaphor for personal growth. Harry doesn't need anyone else to rescue him. He's enough. The film delivers a Patronus, but it lacks the revelation. In Alfonso Cuarón's adaptation, Harry realizes he saved himself with a passing comment. I knew I could do it because I'd seen me do it. But it lands like an afterthought. The camera does not linger. The music does not swell. The viewer is not invited to sit in the awe of that realization. The psychological impact is sacrificed for pacing. But in the book, this moment is a rite of passage. It is not about magic. It is about maturity. The use of the stag Patronus is not merely symbolic, but is deeply rooted in Harry's identity. The stag represents James, yes, but its emergence from Harry's wand signals more than genetic inheritance. It is legacy through love. Harry conjures the memory of his father not from sight or sound, but from belief. The belief that someone loved him enough to protect him, and that he now can carry that love forward. Prongs, he whispers in awe of the silver stag. It is not his father's ghost. It is the light that remains when darkness comes. This entire sequence is a turning point in Harry's development as a wizard and as a person. Up to this point, Harry has been reactive, responding to threats, relying on luck and help from others. But this is the first time he steps into power with clarity and control. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't flinch. He acts because he believes. A belief rooted in experience, even if the experience comes from the future. This is more than clever plotting. It's literary magic, the weaving of time and character into one. Rowling's handling of time travel in this chapter is particularly elegant. She doesn't over-explain it. She doesn't rely on sci-fi jargon. Instead, time behaves like memory, fragile, looping and layered. The idea that Harry could only cast the Patronus because he had already seen it is paradoxical, yes, but it also feels deeply human. How often do we find courage in what we think we know? How often does belief precede action? Harry's time loop is not just a plot device, it's an emotional mirror. Even the physical description of the Patronus has weight. It wasn't a horse, Harry realizes. It wasn't a unicorn either. It was a stag. It was his father's. The prose shimmers with realization. The stag gallops across the surface of the water, scattering silver light, scattering fear. The Dementors flee, and young Harry, the past Harry, survives. The circle is complete. The boy who waited to be saved became the savior. The rescue of Sirius Black also gains nuance through this sequence. In the film, they fly up and break into the tower, almost like a video game cutscene, but in the book, it's a desperate, beautiful moment. Sirius, half dead, takes one look at Buckbeak and laughs. He has nothing left to lose. His godson, James's son, has saved him, and Harry is no longer just a boy with a lightning scar. He is a force of magic, of will. He rides with Sirius across the sky, not as a passenger, but as a companion in hope. The ride itself, bareback on a winged creature at midnight, carries the rhythm of folklore. It is not just escape, it is rebirth. The boy and the godfather, both wronged by fate, fly together into the night. The world beneath them is dangerous, unjust, trembling. But for a moment, high above the tower, there is only wind and wings and wonder. The film, elegant and atmospheric, paints the story in broad strokes of shadow and light. But the book offers something richer, an inner journey. Rowling's chapter is about more than saving Sirius. It is about saving oneself. It is about seeing the face of your hero and realizing it's your own reflection. It's about time, belief, and the moment a boy becomes something more. That chapter, chapter 21, is where Harry Potter stops being a boy who survived and becomes a boy who decides. It is where the magic stops being whimsical and starts being transformational. The irony is that a scene built on loops and repetition becomes a singular moment in the heart of the series. One act, one Patronus, one boy standing alone by a lake and choosing to shine. The emotional weight that Rowling imbues into that realization, I thought it was my dad, but it was me, is the very marrow of the Harry Potter saga. It's the hinge on which so many future choices swing. Without that moment, Harry's later sacrifices, his leadership in Dumbledore's army, even his final walk into the forest, lack the same inevitability. That moment at the lake is the seed. Perhaps that is why so many readers return to that chapter, reading it with the breathless pace of a first-time discovery. It's not because of the time travel, it's because of the clarity. Harry sees his past, his future, and his present in a single glint of silver light. And in that moment, he believes, not in fate, not in prophecy, but in himself. Number 21, the Yule Ball drama. Of all the omitted scenes in the film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, few hold as much emotional nuance as Chapter 23, the Yule Ball. In the book, the ball is not merely a glittering event staged for spectacle. It is, in fact, a minefield of awkward teenage emotions, subtle humiliations, and silent heartbreaks. The film, with all its choreographed elegance and thundering music, glosses over the very elements that made this chapter resonate so deeply with readers. One of the most painfully relatable and entirely human episodes is Harry's dance with Parvati Patil, a moment soaked not in romance or excitement, but in tension and neglect. It's a scene not just about young wizards at a ball, but about how it feels to be ignored by the person you hoped would notice you. Parvati Patil arrives at the Yule Ball radiant in robes of bright pink, her hair twisted into elaborate spirals, embodying every hope of a girl invited by a famous boy to a grand event. She has expectations of fun, of attention, of maybe even something magical. But Harry is too busy peering across the dance floor, searching for Cho Chang, the girl he truly wishes he were with. Every time his eyes flicker away from Parvati's face, the hope dims a little more. He dances with her, yes, but mechanically. His hands are there, his steps are in rhythm, but his soul is elsewhere. Rowling captures it simply, but devastatingly. Parvati seemed to be enjoying herself. She was beaming as she danced, but Harry wasn't really paying attention. The real tragedy lies in how invisible Parvati becomes, despite being right next to the boy who lived. It's not malicious, just thoughtless. A teenage boy so wrapped in his crush and his insecurities that he fails to recognize the girl who said yes to him. The movie renders Parvati a silent background figure, a pretty accessory for Harry's arm. But in the book, her growing discomfort is palpable. She notices Harry's distracted glances, the lack of conversation, the absence of joy, and it hurts. When the music ends and they sit down, Parvati tries once more to salvage the evening, but Harry barely engages. His head is turned toward the far end of the table, where Cho is sitting with Cedric Diggory. It is Parvati who finally breaks the invisible string, choosing not to sit in miserable silence. She eventually drifts off to dance with a Beauxbatons boy, leaving Harry to his brooding. She was not there to be a placeholder. She wanted to be seen. In one sentence, Rowling lets us feel the rejection as if it were our own. Parvati deserted him for a Beauxbatons boy with a poofy haircut, and Harry was left alone, feeling stupid. This emotional negligence is mirrored and amplified in the dynamic between Ron and Parvati's twin, Padma. The two boys had made a last-minute scramble for dates, grasping at the Patil twins as if they were lifelines to social acceptability. Padma, dressed in turquoise robes and visibly trying to remain poised, finds herself shackled to a sulking Ron Weasley, who spends the entire evening glowering at Hermione Granger and Victor Crumb. He does not ask Padma to dance. He does not speak kindly. He does not offer even the politeness of eye contact. Padma is so removed from his attention that she may as well be sitting with someone else entirely. At their table, the tension is thick. Ron's jealousy of Crumb bubbles just beneath the surface, spilling out in biting comments and curt refusals. Hermione returns in a daze, cheeks flushed, giddy, and transformed in Crumb's presence. Ron sees it, hates it, and does nothing to hide his disgust. And in this storm of adolescent emotion sits Padma, stiff and increasingly distant, a silent witness to a teenage implosion. The camera in the film never lingers on her face, but in the book we imagine every pained glance, every shift in her seat, every swallow of a comment that goes unspoken. The dinner itself is a tragic comedy of teenage fumbling. The film reduces this to visual flair, but the book gives us the inner monologues and subtext. Harry can't think of what to say. Ron is too busy being sour. Hermione is torn between joy and frustration. And the Patil twins, dressed beautifully and full of anticipation, realize they are not part of their date's priorities. The symmetry of it, 2 girls, 2 boys, both pairs suffering from mismatched expectations, makes it almost Shakespearean in its quiet sadness. Ron, in particular, is consumed by an unspoken realization. Hermione is not his, and perhaps never was. He doesn't understand his own feelings well enough to name them, so he masks them in scorn. He insults Crumb's intelligence, mocks his accent, and makes Hermione feel small for daring to be happy. Hermione, too, breaks by the end of the evening, famously unleashing the line, "Next time there's a ball, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort." But even this eruption, echoed in the film, is stripped of the context that makes it sting so deeply. The Yule Ball is more than just an elegant interlude. It is a collision of desire, jealousy, pride, and neglect. Every interaction is laced with layered emotion. The book slows down time, allows these interactions to fester and unfold. The film, by contrast, moves past the ball with visual fanfare, a few spins on the dance floor, a burst of music, and on to the next scene. But in doing so, it misses the humanity of the moment. What Rowling does in Chapter 23 is expose the fragile egos and dreams of teenagers in a magical world and show that their feelings are as real and raw as those in our own. It is easy to forget, amidst dragons and curses, that Hogwarts is still a school, filled with young people who ache and stumble just like any of us. The Yule Ball is their stage not for glory but for awkwardness, and it is in this awkwardness that truth surfaces. Even Hermione, radiant and finally seen, is not entirely at ease. She is torn. On one hand, she has Crumb, who treats her with respect and sees her intelligence. On the other, she has Ron, whose disapproval wounds her more than she wishes to admit. This isn't a love triangle, it's a map of unspoken loyalties and confused affections, and it plays out with all the messiness of real teenage life. Parvati and Padma, meanwhile, walk away not just disappointed, but changed. They learn something about boys, about expectations, about what it means to be overlooked. Their presence is not just decorative, it is essential to the emotional weight of the chapter. And by omitting their experience, the film lightens a moment that was meant to be heavy. Harry's detachment throughout the ball is not just about Cho Chang, it's about being overwhelmed, insecure, unsure of himself. He does not know how to hold a conversation, how to lead a dance, how to be the person others expect him to be. His fame is a mask he cannot remove, and behind it is a boy unsure of every step. The dance with Parvati is a symbol of that uncertainty. He stumbles not with his feet, but with his heart. The worst part is that Parvati knows. She senses instinctively that she is not wanted here, not really. And yet she tries, she smiles, she dances, she endures. And when it becomes too much, she leaves, not in anger, but in quiet retreat. That choice, too, is powerful. She claims her dignity in silence, something the film never allows her to do. There is also a deeper commentary here about the roles girls play in boys' stories. Parvati and Padma are not given the chance to be central characters. They are supportive, beautiful, convenient. But Rowling subtly resists this. She shows us how it feels to be the side character, how much it hurts to be the backup plan. In that way, Chapter 23 is not just about Harry and Ron, it's about the girls who said yes and were still left behind. And yet, there is comedy in the tragedy. Rowling does not let the misery drown the scene entirely. There are moments of humour, clumsy steps, uncomfortable silences, Ron's utter cluelessness that make the sadness bearable. It is the humour of recognition, the laughter that comes from remembering your own school dances, your own awkward glances, your own misread signs. What the film fails to capture is the intimacy of embarrassment. In the book, the ball feels like it lasts forever, as such nights often do when you wish they'd just end. The silences stretch, the glances linger, the words unsaid scream louder than the music, and at the end of it all everyone walks away slightly bruised, slightly changed. The emotional architecture of Chapter 23 is precise. It is not about who danced with whom, but about who wanted to and who didn't. The film gives us choreography, the book gives us heartache. And that heartache matters. It shapes the characters in ways more profound than any Triwizard task. The film adaptation missed an opportunity. It could have shown us not just the grandeur, but the grief, not just the music, but the melancholy. Instead, it dressed up a deeply personal chapter and moved on. But for readers, the Yule Ball remains unforgettable not because of the gowns or the glitter, but because it was real. The moment Harry watches Cho with Cedric, not with anger but with quiet pain, is one we've all lived. The moment Parvati realizes she is merely a stand-in, that one too. The moment Hermione wants to be noticed by someone who only notices when it's too late, devastating. And Padma, trapped in a night she didn't ask for, sits as a ghost beside a boy lost in his own drama. In a world of spells and monsters, it is these moments, these very human stings, that stay with us. That's what makes Chapter 23 so essential. That's what makes its absence from the film so glaring. In skipping the awkward, the painful, the raw, the movie forgot the most magical truth of all, that the heart is the most unpredictable force in any world, magical or not. Number 22, hiding in the forest. In the cold, damp quiet of an English forest, 3 teenagers wandered without direction, their hope thinning with every sunrise. The film Deathly Hallows Part 1 captured flashes of this time, the flickering of a campfire, the silhouette of a tent among the trees, a muffled argument, but the book let us live there. Chapters 15 through 21 of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows present not just a passage of time, but a psychological terrain, a landscape of silence, of gnawing hunger, of unspoken pain, and at the heart of it, the disintegration of the trio, the golden trio, the heart of the story, torn open and raw under the strain of a mission that had stopped making sense. The forest was their purgatory. It had no beginning and no end, just trees that stretched out like prison bars. Hermione's enchanted beaded bag carried their only lifelines: tent, books, spare clothes. But no matter how many spells they cast, they could not conjure warmth, comfort, or answers. Harry, carrying the weight of Dumbledore's death and the Horcrux around his neck, felt himself sinking into a darker kind of isolation. The locket didn't whisper like the ring had, but it pressed, a cold presence against his chest, feeding his doubts. He didn't realize it was poisoning them all. The pages swell with the slow erosion of their unity. They apparated from one forest to another, setting up camp, shielding themselves with protective enchantments, and hoping the Horcrux would not consume them from the inside. The days passed like ghosts, silent, repetitive, unchanging. Hunger set in, real hunger, the kind that carves itself into the body. Hermione tried to summon food, but food is one of the 5 principal exceptions to Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, she reminded them, voice brittle. Scavenging and rationing followed, their tempers frayed like worn threads. Harry watched Hermione at night, her outline silvered by moonlight as she turned page after page of the tales of Beetle the Bard, searching for meaning in Dumbledore's cryptic bequest. She no longer smiled. Her curls were tangled, her voice quieter. The tension between her and Ron was thick enough to slice with a blade. Ron, increasingly irritable, accused her of taking Harry's side. He didn't understand why they were following a symbol. A triangle, a line, and a circle, he spat. What's that supposed to mean? But beneath Ron's frustration pulsed a deeper fear. For his family, for his sister, who might be tortured as they hid in the woods. The radio, their one lifeline to the world, whispered names, missing, dead, captured. Harry's name, Ron's name, Hermione's too. They were fugitives and they were failing. When Ron left, it wasn't dramatic in the book. It was devastatingly real. There was no grand storm or cinematic exit, just an argument turned knife. "You don't know what it's like. You're not seeing my family tortured," Ron yelled, voice cracking. Harry's retort, something about being hunted and seeing people die, was true, but it didn't matter. Ron wanted to go. He disappeared into the darkness, the sound of his disapparition the loudest noise in days. The tent was never colder. Hermione didn't cry, not the way film audiences saw her. She was quieter than ever. She didn't look at Harry. She went to bed and turned her back. In the book, her pain was more visceral because it was buried. She didn't scream. She became silence incarnate. When Harry offered her tea the next morning, she refused to drink it. That's the kind of grief that doesn't make for good cinema. It makes for truth. And then the hiding turned inward. The mission became solitary. Harry, Hermione by his side, but unreachable, began spiraling. His thoughts churned in the dark. The Horcrux seemed heavier now, more insidious. When he wore it, his temper shortened. His thoughts darkened. Rowling described the locket's effect chillingly. It felt like a parasite, a leech. He hated wearing it, but he hated giving it up too. It was a cycle of poison. They searched for clues in every scrap Dumbledore left behind. Harry's dreams grew more vivid. Voldemort chasing the Elder Wand, torturing wandmakers. The forest wasn't just a prison. It was a slow strangulation. They had no news, no map, and no victory. The silence of the trees became oppressive, mocking. Hermione clung to Dumbledore's gift, the Book of Fairy Tales, and to the notes scribbled by Rita Skeeter. But it was clear her faith was fracturing. She tried to keep Harry grounded with logic and plans, but even she knew they were walking in circles. Harry, meanwhile, was haunted by the graveyard visit in Godric's Hollow. He was chasing shadows. He started to wonder if Dumbledore had lied, if the old man had sent them on a quest to die. Was he meant to finish it, or just carry it long enough to give someone else a chance? The forest gave no answers. Only wind and frost. When Harry and Hermione visited Godric's Hollow on Christmas Eve, the weight of loneliness was unbearable. They stood at his parents' grave, the snow thick on the ground, and the words on the tombstone hit like thunder. "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." Harry's chest ached with a kind of pain that had no name. He didn't just miss his parents, he missed the idea of hope. In the churchyard, in the stillness, Hermione took his hand. There were no words, just human contact, that brief moment of warmth in the cold. In the movie, it's barely a scene, but in the book, it's a revelation. That connection still existed barely. Their brush with Bathilda Bagshot was horror of another kind. The film turned it into a jump scare, but the book gave it weight. Bathilda's rotting corpse, possessed by Nagini, and the collapse of Harry's wand, it was a breaking point. His only connection to his past shattered. His wand was broken, nearly severed in two. He cried for it, as one might cry for a fallen friend. It was a grief the film barely addressed. Hermione tried to fix it. Of course she did. Her wand was steady, her fingers careful, but the spell didn't hold. They had one wand now, one weapon, one chance. And yet Harry didn't give up. He began watching the snitch, convinced it held something important. He spoke aloud to it, whispered to it in the dark. It gave nothing back, just a gleam, a promise he didn't understand. And so they waited, and hoped, or pretended to. Then came the silver doe. Its appearance in the forest was quiet, almost holy. The book paints the scene with reverence. Harry follows it through the snow, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. It leads him to the frozen pool. The sword of Gryffindor gleams beneath the ice. He knows what he must do. He strips, dives, and the Horcrux tries to kill him. It tightens around his neck like a serpent. It almost succeeds. And then Ron returns. He pulls Harry from the water. He saves him, and it is earned. In the film, Ron's reappearance is a plot point. In the book, it's a resurrection, a redemption. The forest had broken them, but Ron found his way back. He heard Hermione's voice through the deluminator, as if love itself had become a spell. It was like she was whispering my name. Together, they destroy the Horcrux. The sword hisses as it slices through it. The locket doesn't die quietly. It screams, unleashing images of Harry and Hermione entwined, taunting Ron's deepest insecurities. The forest echoes with their struggle. Ron prevails, and for the first time in weeks they laugh. The sound is foreign. When they return to the tent, Hermione's fury is thunderous. She throws books, she screams, she cries. But it's life, it's passion, it's proof that they still care, that something in them still burns. These chapters in the book are about waiting, about suffering without reward, about believing when there's no reason to. The forest became their crucible, not a battleground, but a test of loyalty, of faith, of love. The film gave us action, but the book gave us humanity. The quiet kind, the painful kind, the kind that builds heroes, not with wands, but with silence and survival. Number 23, Dumbledore's Will. The 7th chapter of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, titled The Will of Albus Dumbledore, unfolds quietly but with immense emotional weight. This is a moment layered with unspoken questions and buried meanings. The films chose to represent it in the most skeletal of outlines, mere seconds of screen time, a simple mention of the trio receiving their items. But the book lingers here, and in doing so it allows the reader to step into the strange silence that follows a wizard's death, and into the hollow space left by Albus Dumbledore's legacy. It is here, not in some grand battle or explosive reveal, that the mystery of his past begins to surface with a subtle unease. When Scrimgeour arrives at the burrow to deliver Dumbledore's will, there is an immediate shift in the room. He does not simply hand over gifts. He interrogates, he hesitates, he questions their intent. His visit is not an act of bureaucratic courtesy, it is one of suspicion. The Ministry has delayed the delivery of Dumbledore's personal bequests for a full month, a detail that alone carries a sense of violation. Dumbledore, once lauded by the Ministry, is now the subject of its unease. His final acts raise too many questions, and that worry bleeds into the atmosphere. Harry watches the minister closely, aware that they are not just being given gifts, they are being evaluated. Harry is handed a simple golden snitch. Scrimgeour is visibly frustrated by this. What value could there be in leaving such a mundane item? But Harry knows Dumbledore would never leave something meaningless. In his hand, the snitch seems warm. The text notes, Harry's heart was hammering. It had not escaped his notice that Dumbledore had left him the very snitch he had caught in his first ever Quidditch match. The weight of that moment lingers, not just the nostalgia, but the suspicion. The snitch, a symbol of Harry's beginnings, is now a riddle at the end, and Harry knows there is something more. The enchantment that reveals itself later, I open at the close, is not known yet, but its potential hums in the air, and that tension is entirely missing in the film. Hermione's bequest is even more peculiar. The Tales of Beetle the Bard, a children's book, At first glance, it is an odd choice for someone as intellectual and rational as she is, and that's the point. Hermione's world is ruled by logic, academia, research. Dumbledore hands her something ancient, symbolic, irrational. Her trust in knowledge is challenged. The book is filled with fairy tales she has never read. "Children's stories," she whispers, as if puzzled by her own inability to decode their meaning. For perhaps the first time her intelligence feels insufficient. Dumbledore is nudging her towards a wisdom not written in textbooks. Ron, too, receives a gift that defies expectations, the Deluminator, a small silver object shaped like a cigarette lighter. At first glance a toy, but Ron's gift is the most emotionally precise. It is not just a device to extinguish lights, it is a map of loyalty, a call back home. The book never overstates its function, but Ron's journey later proves its significance. In a moment of betrayal and separation, when Ron abandons the group out of anger and fear, the Deluminator leads him back, not by logic, but by love. Dumbledore saw Ron's future weakness and planned his redemption. This is not made clear in the film. The Deluminator is a gadget. In the book, it is a lifeline. These gifts are not random trinkets. They are seeds of the journey. But more than that, they reflect how deeply Dumbledore understood them and how little he ever explained. This silence unsettles Harry most. He realizes, perhaps too late, how much Dumbledore kept from him. Scrimgeour's suspicion echoes Harry's own. Why didn't Dumbledore share these plans while alive? Why cloak his guidance in puzzles? Why couldn't he have just told me everything, Harry thinks, the question hanging heavier with each passing chapter. This is where the emotional undertone of the scene gains its complexity. Harry's grief is not simple mourning. It is riddled with confusion, disappointment, and a rising anger. Dumbledore was the mentor who never quite let him in. And now, posthumously, he has given Harry a quest with hidden instructions and no map. The snitch feels like a message meant only for Harry, but it is a message he doesn't know how to read. That helplessness is never conveyed in the films. Hermione, despite her initial curiosity, grows increasingly frustrated with the tales of Beetle the Bard. She cannot reconcile them with her understanding of the magical world. "They're just stories," she says at first. But Dumbledore's choice gnaws at her. Why this book? Why now? It is not until much later, when the tale of the three brothers becomes relevant, that she grasps its meaning. But this chapter marks the beginning of her doubt, a moment when the sharpest mind in the trio realizes she has entered territory that cannot be solved with cleverness alone. Ron's moment is quieter, but just as powerful. The Deluminator is dismissed by Scrimgeour as whimsical, but Dumbledore saw Ron's insecurity long before Ron himself did. Ron, always the sidekick, always in Harry's shadow. The Deluminator is more than an object. It is proof that Dumbledore believed Ron would leave, and that he could be brave enough to return. It is an affirmation that even in weakness Ron would be worthy. That narrative arc is deeply moving. In the film it becomes a subplot, resolved with a splash in the pond. But in the book, it is emotional architecture. What is remarkable about this chapter is the slow, simmering revelation that Dumbledore's trust is not straightforward. He believes in them, but he also tests them. He offers no comfort, only tools. And the tools are mystifying. There is something Machiavellian in his distance. This is when the reader begins to realize that Dumbledore is not the benevolent saint he often appeared to be. He is a planner, a manipulator, a man with secrets. And the will is his final chess move. When Scrimgeour interrogates Harry about the snitch, "Do you know why Dumbledore left you this?" the moment carries an undertone of legal paranoia. The Ministry is not only concerned with Dumbledore's secrets, they are afraid of what he might have passed on. The text reads, "He eyed Harry shrewdly. A snitch would have been examined thoroughly for hidden spells and enchantments." That fear, that urgency, tells the reader what the government suspects, that Dumbledore may have left behind more than memories, he may have left power. The Ministry's delay in delivering the will is described with bureaucratic coldness, but it is a clear violation. Dumbledore's last requests are not honoured promptly, they are treated as threats. That, too, tells a story. Even dead, Dumbledore unsettles the Ministry. This man, who once led the fight against Voldemort, is now watched with the suspicion of a dissident, and Harry absorbs that unease. It is the beginning of his growing mistrust, not just of the Ministry, but of Dumbledore himself. Each item in the will is a door, slightly ajar, leading to truths that won't be revealed for hundreds of pages. The snitch, of course, contains the resurrection stone. The book contains the fable that leads them to understand the Deathly Hallows. The Deluminator proves that love can call someone back even when words fail, but in this chapter these are only shadows. What we are given is doubt and silence and a flicker of magic that means something but not yet. Harry's isolation begins here. Until now he has followed Dumbledore with faith. But the will is a turning point. For the first time he feels abandoned not just by death, but by design. Dumbledore orchestrated things to unfold without explanation, and as Harry examines the snitch, he thinks not of comfort but of suspicion. He is aware that Dumbledore has manipulated him, even in death. That knowledge adds complexity to their relationship, and it alters the way Harry approaches the journey ahead. This subtle erosion of certainty is what makes Chapter 7 so vital. It prepares the trio for the spiritual and emotional toll of what lies ahead. The gifts are metaphors, but they are also prophecies. Dumbledore sees what they will face, not just Voldemort, but each other and themselves. Ron will leave, Hermione will doubt, Harry will question, and the will is where that begins. That weight does not translate in a film that moves too quickly through its beats. There is a moment, after Scrimgeour leaves, when the trio sits with their items in silence. It is not a victory. It is a pause, heavy with confusion. The reader understands that nothing is as it seems, that Dumbledore's death has not closed a door but opened a maze, and they are inside it with no map. The scene echoes with absence. Dumbledore is gone, but his influence is everywhere, and the silence he left behind is louder than any speech he could have given. Even Hermione, usually the source of clarity, admits her confusion. "I don't know what it means," she says. For her, this is almost a confession of failure. But Dumbledore's lesson is that meaning is not always immediate. It is lived, understood through action, not deduction. The book guides her there. The film skips the journey. Chapter 7 does not dazzle with action or reveal, but it plants every seed for the spiritual journey that follows. It is about the discomfort of inheritance, not material, but emotional. The trio is not given weapons, they are given riddles, and in solving them, they will not just defeat Voldemort, they will understand the kind of people they are becoming. This is what the film never captures: the interior journey, the quiet disorientation, the way grief shapes purpose. Number 24, Magical Exams. The last weeks of Harry Potter's first year at Hogwarts were not just a time of dark suspicion and midnight mysteries, they were also the days of parchment scrolls, trembling quills, and classroom magic that charmed both reader and character alike. As the threat of Voldemort's return brewed quietly in the shadows, the corridors of the castle echoed with groans and laughter, not just fear. The exams, long dreaded by the first years, arrived not with disaster, but with levity and sparkle. J.K. Rowling's 16th chapter in The Philosopher's Stone, Through the Trapdoor, begins not with an adventure, but with a delightful interruption: end-of-year tests. This moment, oddly missing from the film, forms a tonal prelude that casts the final confrontation in a sharper, more emotional light. In the book, the exam season unfolds like a mini-festival of magical oddities. For the students, It is a week of nerves and chaos, but also colour and wonder. The written tests come first, filled with enchanted quills and no opportunity for cheating. These are followed by practical examinations where students are expected to demonstrate their spellwork in front of the professors. Rowling paints this with such vivid charm that readers are drawn into a whimsical interlude where magic still feels new, unshaped, and gleefully unpredictable. Harry, Ron, and Hermione each respond in ways true to their nature. Hermione with dazzling excellence, Ron with dramatic agony, and Harry with distracted suspicion. The most whimsical moment, the dancing pineapple, occurs during Professor Flitwick's charms exam. It is a moment that practically dances off the page. Hermione did well on the theory, Rowling writes, and was the first to make her pineapple tap dance across the desk. It's a scene that says everything about Hogwarts that we long to believe, a place where magic is not just serious business but gleeful absurdity, where fruit is given rhythm and first years are applauded for creativity. It isn't just about grades, it's about the joy of wonder. Watching a pineapple do a jig under the wand of an 11-year-old is precisely the kind of detail that anchors the magical in the mundane. For Ron, exams bring out his worst traits. His frustration builds steadily through the week as he struggles with theory and flubs charms with a sigh that makes the classroom feel too small. In the book, Rowling writes with a touch of humour, saying, "Ron muttered that he'd never be able to look at a pineapple again without feeling sick." His suffering is comic relief, but also contrast. Unlike Hermione's brilliance or Harry's anxious distraction, Ron is the average boy in a world that's anything but average. His fatigue and irritation act as an emotional anchor. Not every wizard is exceptional. Not every test ends in fireworks, but every student is expected to show up, wand ready, nerves or not. Harry, meanwhile, is in a world of his own. His heart isn't in the dancing pineapples or the enchantment of the written tests. He is haunted by dreams of flying motorcycles and Voldemort's cackling laughter. In one of the most unsettling lines from the chapter, Rowling shares that Harry dreams of Quirrell's turban talking to him, telling him he must transfer to Slytherin at once. He wakes in cold sweats, utterly distracted. The irony here is sharp. While everyone around him is panicking about marks, Harry's mind is on a darker exam, one not on any Hogwarts schedule. His tests are of loyalty, courage, and truth. The beauty of this chapter lies in its duality. On the surface, it's about end-of-year tests, levitating objects, transfiguring animals, and remembering potion ingredients. But beneath it flows a deeper current. While the rest of Hogwarts is counting down to the holidays, Harry is sensing the approach of something dangerous. His instincts are sharp, and Rowling makes the shift in tone feel natural. Exams are over, now comes something more primal. She writes, Harry's scar was hurting worse than ever, and he was sure Snape was planning to steal the stone that night. This tension, growing steadily throughout the chapter, bursts free only after we've spent time dancing with fruit and worrying about grades. In removing this sequence from the film, something crucial was lost, the contrast that magnifies courage. In the book, the ordinary precedes the extraordinary. We see the trio not as heroes yet, but as kids struggling with tests and teachers, no different from children in any school except their pineapples wear shoes. This humanizes them. It's the last time they feel like students. After this, they become something else, adventurers crossing into the forbidden, risking expulsion or worse. The juxtaposition of these tones gives their choice more weight. The written exams themselves are a feast of imagination. Though Rowling doesn't list every question, she hints at the wildness of wizard academia. Students must answer theory about werewolf transformations and recite incantations by memory. Magical lore, potion brewing, and spell accuracy are all tested. One can almost imagine Neville longingly flipping through 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, or Seamus nervously trying not to set his desk on fire. There is a realism in the bureaucracy of it all. Yes, even in a magical school, students must prove their knowledge. The difference is, here, they prove it with sparkles. There is also an atmosphere of camaraderie. Hermione, ever the academic, shares last-minute notes. Ron doodles stick figures battling dragons on his parchment margins. Harry tries to keep his hands from shaking as he sits exams while plagued by visions of the Forbidden Forest and the Stone. It's the final image of childhood before the night falls, when books are traded for broomsticks and corridors for corridors of fire. Without this moment, the transition to peril feels rushed in the film. In the book, it feels earned. One moment that stands out is their practical transfiguration test with Professor McGonagall. Rowling describes it in detail, turning a mouse into a snuff box, and notes that points were awarded for how pretty the snuff box was, but taken away if it still had whiskers. The charm of this lies in the detail. Magic is not just about results, but finesse. Hermione's box, no doubt, sparkled. Ron's probably had whiskers and a twitch. Harry, caught between exams and paranoia, likely struggled. These subtle contrasts reveal the characters more deeply than any direct explanation could. Even Professor Snape gets his moment. His exam likely involved cruelly precise potion-making, though Rowling doesn't dwell long on it. We imagine Harry's trembling hands, Snape's sneer, and Hermione whispering, "Be careful with the powdered root of asphodel." In cutting this moment, the film misses a chance to show how Snape's academic brilliance terrified and intimidated long before his allegiance was known. Exams were, for him, yet another battleground. What makes the pineapple scene so symbolic is not just its humor, but its placement. Here, in a castle where danger lurks beneath trapdoors, students are asked to make fruit dance. The absurdity is deliberate. It reminds the reader and Harry that this world, for all its darkness, is one of joy. Before the stakes rise, Rowling offers levity. The pineapple becomes a metronome of innocence. Once it stops tapping, childhood ends. There's also the deeper structure of pacing. The exams act as narrative breathing space. Rowling knows her readers, especially young ones, need tension to rise gradually. The exams delay the climax, letting us savor Hogwarts in its most school-like form. When we turn the page and see Neville standing in front of the fat lady, warning them not to go out, the danger hits harder. Just one day ago, Hermione was perfecting spellwork on dancing fruit. Now she's hexing her friend unconscious to reach a trapdoor. The absence of this contrast in the film flattens the story arc. The viewer is taken from clues and conversations straight into the dungeon crawl. But in the book, we see how these children grew from nervous test-takers into people who decide to stand up when adults look away. The transition is slow, believable, and therefore moving. When they step through the trapdoor, they do so not as legendary Gryffindors, but as 11-year-olds who just finished their finals. The anxiety Harry feels during this chapter is so specific and well written that it deserves more attention. He is not afraid of failing exams, he is afraid of being too late. His gut tells him that danger is near, but the exams distract everyone around him. Even Dumbledore is gone. Even Hermione, for all her brilliance, initially insists they must wait. Rowling writes, Hermione, who could normally be relied upon to keep a cool head, was now staring at her watch and biting her lip. The pressure builds, and we feel it in every missed beat of a dancing pineapple. Fred and George, always comic relief, are also taking their exams, and one imagines their practical charms exam involving spectacular failures and grand flourishes. In this unseen chapter, they too are students first, pranksters second. Their presence in the background adds richness to the school tapestry, reminding us that Hogwarts is more than just one trio. It's a breathing, bustling place where laughter and fear coexist. By the end of the chapter, the tests are over. The dormitory feels quiet. The trio packs up nerves and resolve. And when Hermione says, "I'm going to bed before either of you come up with another clever idea to get us killed, or worse, expelled," it lands with more meaning than ever. We know she's just passed every exam with flying colours. We know Ron barely scraped by. We know Harry hasn't slept in days. They are real children, not caricatures. This is why their bravery matters. And this is why the film's omission of the exams, while understandable for time, is a loss of texture. Without the dancing pineapple, we miss the last shimmer of light before darkness falls. We miss the silliness that makes the danger feel real. We miss seeing Hogwarts as a school, not a battlefield. Rowling gave us pineapples before peril. That choice was deliberate. That contrast was earned. And for readers, it remains one of the most magical parts of the journey. Number 25, Valentine's Day, Disaster. The 13th chapter of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets contains one of the most bizarre, hilarious, and underappreciated moments in the entire series, a moment that never made it to the screen. On Valentine's Day, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, in all his flamboyant arrogance, transformed Hogwarts into a spectacle of pinks and reds, smothering its ancient walls in flowers and glitter. The occasion was meant to celebrate love, but instead it became a masterclass in teenage discomfort, awkwardness, and second-hand embarrassment. Lockhart, ever thirsty for attention, seized the opportunity not only to honor the romantic holiday, but to center it around himself. And while the rest of the students groaned at the ridiculous decorations, he seemed completely unaware that he had created a school-wide crisis of collective mortification. The movie version of The Chamber of Secrets completely omitted this scene. Not a whisper of pink confetti, not a single dwarf in a Cupid costume, and certainly no public humiliation delivered in the form of singing telegrams. This was a tragic loss, not just because it robbed the audience of a laugh, but because it eliminated a deeply humanizing, funny, and vulnerable moment for several characters, especially Harry. In a story increasingly dark with talk of bloodlines, monsters, and murder, the absurdity of Lockhart's Valentine's Day should have stood out as a gem of teenage comedy. The Hogwarts that Lockhart decorated for Valentine's Day was transformed into something grotesque. According to the book, Lockhart had decorated the hall with large, lurid pink flowers. Heart-shaped confetti drifted from the pale blue ceiling. Lockhart, wearing lurid pink robes to match the decorations, greeted the stunned students in the Great Hall with a booming, "Happy Valentine's Day." The entire setup sounded like something out of a bad dream, made worse by the professor's complete belief in its charm. The enchanted ceiling itself was raining confetti, turning every meal into a storm of hearts and sparkles. Most remarkable, however, were the dwarfs, short, surly men dressed as cupids, complete with golden wings and harps, roaming the castle to deliver valentines. Lockhart had hired them as messengers, convinced that nothing would delight the students more than singing telegrams. To ensure that nothing would spoil the day for his little cupids, Lockhart had issued school-wide permission for them to interrupt classes, lunch, or any other school activity. It was chaos. Romantic confessions, embarrassing limericks, and teenage drama bloomed like a rash across Hogwarts. Harry, of course, was the unfortunate centerpiece of the worst scene. On his way to class, attempting to mind his own business, he was ambushed in a hallway by one of Lockhart's hired dwarfs. In a moment of pure spectacle, the dwarf tackled him to the floor, straddled him, and, without permission, began to sing a love poem in front of a crowd of jeering students. The corridor, thick with observers, became a stage for Harry's personal nightmare. According to the book, the dwarf announced, "His eyes are as green as a fresh, pickled toad. His hair is as dark as a blackboard. I wish he was mine. He's really divine. The hero who conquered the Dark Lord." It is heavily implied and later confirmed that the poem came from Ginny Weasley, who had a massive crush on Harry at the time. The effect of this revelation was threefold. First, it exposed Harry to ridicule. Second, it humiliated Ginny to the point of near invisibility. And third, it introduced a comedic counterbalance to the tension surrounding the Chamber of Secrets storyline. In the midst of attacks and whispers about the heir of Slytherin, Hogwarts still had time for bad poetry and public blushing. What makes this scene so important isn't just that it was funny, It's that it brought the characters down from the pedestal of fantasy and grounded them in the very real awkwardness of being a teenager. Harry, who was being idolized, feared and whispered about in the same chapter, suddenly found himself reduced to an ordinary boy with flushed cheeks and a loss for words. He wasn't fighting monsters in that moment, he was dodging a singing dwarf and a poem about his eyes. That is the kind of contrast that makes characters breathe. Ginny, too, becomes more than a shy girl on the sidelines. Her Valentine, horribly executed though it was, marked one of the first concrete moments where her feelings were visible. She was brave enough to send it, terrified enough to run away, and vulnerable enough to hope Harry wouldn't guess. Her red face, noted in the next few pages, spoke louder than any confession, and though Harry didn't yet understand, readers got the first visible heartbeat of a romance that wouldn't bloom until years later. Ron and Draco were both present for the scene, and their reactions serve as further layers of humor and character development. Ron, protective and deeply embarrassed for his sister, tried to deflect attention. Draco, of course, reveled in the opportunity to mock Harry. The line between bully and boy was never clearer. Draco's laughter echoed through the corridor, but even he wasn't immune to the absurdity of the moment. These layered reactions make the Valentine's Day chaos one of the best ensemble scenes in the book. Lockhart's behavior in all of this should not go unexamined. He strutted through the day believing that he was making Hogwarts a happier place. He interrupted his own classes to share tales of romantic exploits and tried to take credit for any Valentine sent by someone popular. His massive ego was on full display. At one point, he even suggested that Harry might want to use the day to declare his own affections. The irony, of course, is that the only thing Harry wanted was to disappear. From a storytelling perspective, the omission of this scene in the film adaptation is difficult to justify. It offered not only a rare slice of comic relief, but also a glimpse into student culture at Hogwarts. In the books, we see how students navigate their lives, crushes, embarrassment, cliques, misunderstandings, all while magic swirls around them. The films, by contrast, often present a more sterilized, cinematic Hogwarts, stripped of many humanizing details. The Valentine's Day fiasco also fits thematically within the Chamber of Secrets' broader narrative. The duality of Hogwarts, its splendor and its danger, has never been clearer than in the contrast between enchanted dwarves and petrified students. On one floor, a dwarf sings a poem about Harry's green eyes. On another, a cat lies rigid beside a wall smeared with the message, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened." Rowling masterfully juxtaposes these realities, showing that even amid terror, life continues with its usual awkward rhythms. By erasing the Valentine's episode, the film missed a chance to explore this duality. It could have given the audience a moment of levity before the next crisis. It could have made the looming threat feel even darker by contrasting it with the ridiculous. And it could have added depth to Ginny, whose internal struggles with the diary were already taking a toll. Her Valentine was a rare moment where she acted on her own feelings, outside Tom Riddle's influence. It's also worth noting how the moment reflected the wider theme of identity. Harry, struggling with the idea that he might be the heir of Slytherin, is confronted with a poem that calls him the hero who conquered the Dark Lord. He's being pushed and pulled between different versions of himself: savior, suspect, teenager. The public Valentine forced him to confront how others saw him and how far that image was from his internal chaos. As for the dwarf, he remains one of the most memorable side characters in the entire book. Despite appearing only once, Rowling describes him as a very surly-looking dwarf in a golden Cupid costume, a phrase that alone conjures a vivid, comic image. His forceful delivery, complete with physical restraint, transforms a Valentine into something between a mugging and a musical. It's absurd, it's unforgettable, it's pure Hogwarts. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of the scene's exclusion is that it erased a moment of connection between the readers and the characters. In a series filled with battles, betrayals, and magic, it's moments like these, awkward, funny, and deeply human, that stay with us. The confetti falling from the ceiling, the flushed faces, the poorly rhymed poem, all of it reminds us that Hogwarts, for all its grandeur, was still a school. Its students were still children. This chapter shows us that being a wizard doesn't spare you from puberty, heartbreak, or humiliation. No spell could stop the cringe that followed Harry for days. No potion could fix Ginny's shattered nerves, and no charm could save Lockhart from his own ego. These truths ground the fantasy and give it heart. They anchor the magical in the mundane, reminding us that even heroes get embarrassed. It's impossible to read Chapter 13 of Chamber of Secrets and not feel the sting of second-hand embarrassment. But it's also impossible not to smile. This is storytelling at its best, multi-layered, character-driven, and entirely relatable. And the absence of that from the movie adaptation, a missed opportunity of epic proportions.